The other scribes said she had the patience of stone, that her eyes seemed to watch more than they should, that silence followed her like a cloak. Evelith had learned not to correct them. Silence kept her alive. Silence had always been her shield. But tonight, silence was not enough. Her hand trembled once, and steadied. She pressed the quill harder, harder still, until the fragile tip snapped, spraying black ink like blood across the page. She hissed under her breath and wiped it quickly, but her gaze was already far away. Back in the dream she could not shake. Tharion Draegor, Alpha of the Keep, bound in chains of burning crimson light, his body arched in agony, shadows clawing at his flesh, his teeth bared not in a snarl, but in torment. Evelith had woken gasping, throat raw from a scream she had not known she'd made. She pressed her palms to the table, breath unsteady. Dreams had followed her since childhood. She had walked in places she should not have known, overheard whispers never meant for her ears. But never before had she seen him, never the Alpha, and never with such clarity that she swore she still smelled the scorched air of his chains. The hours dragged until dawn, until the keep's great hall roared to life. The scrape of boots across stone, the bark of orders, the low growl of arguments. Evelith moved quietly along the edges of it all. Scrolls clutched against her chest, eyes cast downward. She was no one here, a shadow in the court. At the center, seated upon the carved wolf throne, was Tharion Draegor himself. He was everything the stories promised, broad-shouldered, a predator in stillness, his dark mane of hair falling across a scar-lined jaw. His eyes, storm cloud gray, cold and merciless, swept over his council as though daring any of them to falter. When he spoke, the room moved with him, power rolling from his voice like thunder across a mountain. But Evelith saw what others did not. His grip on the throne was too tight, knuckles white, his shoulders stiff, and his breath sharp in places he meant to keep hidden. The faintest shadow of strain marred the Alpha's perfect composure. Her pulse quickened. The dream had not been madness. It was truth. "Lord Alpha," rumbled Torin, the grizzled war general at his side. "The Red Fangs push the borders again. Scouts say they test us, certain you will not respond." A ripple of growls stirred the chamber. The Red Fangs, rivals to the Draegors, a savage clan drunk on bloodshed. To defy them was to invite war. To ignore them was weakness. Tharion's lip curled into a snarl. They test the wrong wolf. The words silenced the room. Power radiated from him. But beneath it, Evelith swore she felt it again. The tremor, the weight of something deeper than war pressing on him. Something eating at him from within. She lowered her gaze quickly, hiding her unease. If the Alpha was faltering, no one must know. And yet, hadn't he already seen her in the dream? Hadn't he looked at her as though he knew her name? That night, sleep dragged Evelith into its snare despite her resistance. She dreamed again, not wandering in shadowed corridors this time, but chained to a place she could not name. She saw him. Tharion Draegor, on his knees. Shackles glowed red around his wrists, biting deep into flesh. His breath tore from his chest, a sound of rage and pain, fused into one. And though she knew she did not belong here, her body moved toward him, reaching. His head lifted. His eyes, gray, storm-racked, wild with fury, locked onto hers. "Who are you?" The words reverberated through the dreamscape, not spoken, but ripped straight into her bones. Evelith gasped, awake, heart hammering. Her hands burned as though she had touched the heat of those shackles. She clutched the sheets, breath breaking, realization sinking deep. The Alpha of Dreadmere had seen her. By morning, a summons awaited her. 2 guards escorted her through the endless halls, their boots echoing. Evelith kept her gaze lowered, fingers clutching her robe to still their tremor. Her mind raced. Why her? Did he know? Could he possibly understand what she had seen? The throne room was silent when the doors groaned open. Empty, save for Tharion Draegor himself. He stood at the dais, half-turned, moonlight spilling through high windows to carve his figure in pale silver. His back was straight, his presence filling the cavernous hall like a storm brewing over black waters. "You've been watching me." His voice was low, dangerous, a growl wrapped in steel. Evelith froze. I don't know what you mean, my lord." At that he turned. His gaze pinned her, sharp and unyielding. The weight of it stripped her bare, as though every secret she had ever kept bled into the open. "Don't lie." His voice was softer now, but more dangerous for it. "You walked in my chains. You saw." Her breath caught. She stumbled a step back. It was only a dream." His eyes narrowed. A humorless smile ghosted his lips. "Dreams do not leave marks." His gaze flicked to her hands. Evelith glanced down and saw, faint against her pale skin, the outline of crimson lines as though burned into her palms. She nearly dropped them to her sides, heart seizing. "How?" Behind him, a raven's shadow cut across the wall as the wind rattled the keep's windows. Its cry echoed faintly through the stone. Evelith's throat tightened. In Draegor lore, the raven was more than a crest. It was the herald of oaths, the omen of binding fates. Her knees weakened under the weight of it. This was no dream. This was no coincidence. She had been pulled into something vast and merciless, a curse or bond that tethered her fate to the Alpha of Dreadmere Keep. And though she could not yet name it, she knew one thing with a certainty that turned her blood to ice. Whatever haunted Tharion Draegor now, hunted her as well.
The storm rolled in by dusk, swallowing the mountains beyond Dreadmere in a curtain of rain. The keep trembled beneath it, the old stone groaning as wind lashed the battlements. Servants hurried to shutter windows, their voices hushed, eyes darting upward at each crack of thunder that echoed through the halls like the growl of an angry god. Evelith sat at her small wooden desk, the candles before her guttering beneath each gust that slipped through the cracks. She was supposed to be transcribing Tharion's council records, yet her hands would not move. The quill lay idle, its tip bleeding ink into a spreading blot that stained the parchment. Instead, she listened. The storm carried voices, not the voices of the keep. Those were muffled, distant, but whispers threaded through the thunder. Her name, her breath, fragments of words she could not quite catch, like claws scratching just beneath the surface of water. She pressed her hands to her ears. Still they came. And with them the dream flash, chains glowing crimson, Tharion's face twisted in rage and pain, his storm-gray eyes fixed on hers. It had been 3 nights since he summoned her into his throne room, since he told her plainly that he had seen her, that her dream was not a dream, but something else, something binding. Evelith had not spoken of it, not to a single soul, but the weight of it had not left her shoulders. She knew only this: she was caught in a snare she could not escape. The next morning, the keep's great hall was filled with the scent of wet fur and fire smoke. Wolves of Dragonor blood, warriors, lieutenants, their second-born kin, gathered at the long tables, their voices rising in challenge and jest. Evelith stood at the far side of the chamber, a scroll tucked under her arm, her presence ignored as it always was. The Alpha's scribe, a shadow among wolves. But when Tharion Draegor entered, silence rippled outward. The Alpha moved with the weight of storms at his back. His presence commanded the room without effort. Broad-shouldered, his dark hair damp from rain, the scar along his jaw catching in the firelight. His eyes, as ever, burned gray as clouded steel. He passed between his wolves, who bowed their heads in respect, then mounted the dais. But even as he sat upon the throne, Evelith saw it again. The faint stiffness in his shoulders, the breath caught too sharply, the faint tremor of fingers that should have been steady as stone. And when his gaze lifted, it was not his counsel he sought, it was her. Evelith's chest tightened. She dropped her gaze at once, pulse hammering, yet it did not matter. She felt his stare like a hand on her throat. The whispers rose again. "You are bound. You are marked." That night, the dream came. Evelith dreamed of a courtyard she had never seen. Black stone cracked with age, weeds pushing through, moonlight silvering the edges of every broken pillar. A raven perched upon the highest arch, its feathers slick with shadow, its eyes molten white. It opened its beak, but no sound came. Instead, the air trembled. Chains clattered unseen, the ground beneath her feet cracked. And from the darkness below, hands reached, clawed, burned. Then came him. Tharion, stepping into the courtyard, his body taut with defiance. But the chains wound him again, red as fire, biting deep. He did not roar, did not fight, only fixed his storm-colored eyes on her and spoke the words like an oath carved into his bones. "If I fall, you fall." Evelith woke screaming. The next morning her chamber door creaked open. A figure filled the doorway, Tharion, the war general, his grizzled face hard as stone. "The Alpha requests you." His voice was flat. Her stomach twisted. She followed him down the winding corridors, each step echoing like a heartbeat. They entered the Alpha's private hall, not the public throne room, but a smaller chamber lit by braziers, lined with maps and weapons and scrolls older than Evelith's bloodline. Here, Tharion stood alone, his back to her, one hand braced on the edge of the war table. "You dream again." His words were not a question. Evelith's throat tightened. "Yes." At that he turned. His eyes were dark, storm heavier than steel. He studied her as though searching for a lie, for weakness. "The raven?" Her lips parted. She hesitated, then nodded. His jaw flexed. For a long moment, silence hung between them, thick as the smoke curling from the braziers. Finally, he spoke. "It comes for me," he said low. "The curse. You see it because you are tied to it, tied to me." Her blood chilled. "Why me?" "I do not know," he said, his voice tight with something between anger and despair. "But the omen does not err. The raven binds. It chooses." Evelith's knees weakened. The raven, the herald of oaths, the omen of bonds. To be chosen by it meant more than fate. It meant entrapment. Her voice broke. "Then I am doomed?" His gaze softened for a fraction of a heartbeat. "We both are." From that day the keep shifted. Where once Evelith was ignored, now eyes followed her. Wolves of Draegor blood looked on her with suspicion, some with fear. Rumors spread that the Alpha scribe was witch-touched, that her silence hid secrets, that she was the raven's shadow walking in flesh. Servants withdrew from her presence, warriors muttered in her wake. And worse still, Evelith could feel something gnawing at the edges of her own mind, a hunger, a pull, as though the chain she had seen in her visions now coiled faintly around her as well. One night, as she walked the halls, she found the shadows lengthening ahead of her, too long, too sharp. The whispering rose louder. She turned a corner and stopped. There, in the dark, stood a wolf. Not a man in shifted form, but a wolf, fur black as pitch, eyes burning red. It did not belong. She knew every wolf of the Draegor clan, their scents, their markings. This was no Draegor wolf. Its lips peeled back in a silent snarl, and then before her eyes it vanished, dissolved into smoke. Evelith pressed herself against the wall, chest heaving. It had not been real, could not have been. And yet when she looked down, the stone floor bore scorched marks where its paws had stood. The curse was no longer confined to dreams. It had entered the keep. The next council gathering was heavy with tension. Tharion argued for war with the Red Fangs, claiming they were testing the Alpha's strength. Others whispered of betrayal, that spies had already entered the keep. Through it all, Tharion remained seated, his hand pressed hard to the arm of his throne, as though anchoring himself against an unseen weight. His eyes darkened, his breaths ragged, but he did not falter. Until his gaze cut to Evelith. Her breath caught. She felt the weight of his stare, the chain between them tightening, dragging, burning. If I fall, you fall. That night, the raven returned to her dreams. It perched on her shoulder this time, its talons cold against her skin. It leaned close, its feathers brushing her cheek, and whispered in a voice like the tearing of silk. Betrayal comes from within. Evelith knew then what the omen meant. The curse was not merely a shackle, it was a warning. Someone within these walls would undo them both. And if she did not uncover who, the bond between her and the Alpha would drag them both into ruin.
The days following the failed attempt with the Moonstone relic were not measured by the sun alone, but by the growing weight pressing upon Tharion Draegor's chest. Each breath was harder won than the last, as though an invisible hand clutched his lungs, testing how long he could endure. Evelith Caelora felt it too, though not in the same suffocating intensity. The binding pact threaded their lives together, stitching moments of his pain into her flesh and etching fragments of his emotions into her heart. The people of Dreadmere Keep whispered in the halls. Word of their leader's decline had spread like wildfire, fanned by fearful speculation. Some swore they had seen him collapsed in the training yard. Others claimed the sorceress Caelora Nyx's ghost prowled the battlements, her laughter echoing like wind through the stone corridors. The old tapestries depicting Stormcloak triumphs seemed to mock him now, their blood-soaked victories unraveling into shadows. But Tharion would not bend before his people. Not yet. In the council chamber, lit by the flicker of torches and the great fire in the hearth, Tharion sat among his advisors. His knuckles were white on the carved oak table, the veins in his forearms taut as bowstrings. Torin, his ever-pragmatic counselor, leaned forward. "Your enemies smell weakness, Tharion," Torin warned, voice low but urgent. "The Ironclaw clan watches closely. Gavrik is bold, and his wolves grow restless. If he believes the oath will finish you, he will strike." Tharion's jaw tightened. "Then let him. I will not hide behind shadows. If Gavrik seeks my blood, he'll choke on it." But even as he said it, the words felt fragile. He had fought 100 battles, but this was a war of attrition against an invisible foe. His strength waned daily. He could not afford bravado. Evelith, sitting at the edge of the chamber, spoke softly. "Your clan doesn't need bravado. They need truth. They need hope." Her voice carried like a ripple across still water, drawing all eyes. Tharion looked at her, noting how her hand rested discreetly on the table's edge, steady though her heart raced. He could feel it, faintly, through their bond. She had grown braver in these weeks, stepping out of the shadows of a scribe's anonymity. "And what truth would you have me give them?" Tharion asked, his tone sharp but not unkind. "That we will not bow to fear, not of Gavrik, not of Caelora, not even of the oath itself." Evelith answered. Her voice trembled at first, then found its strength. "Hope isn't born from pretending to be invincible. It's born from admitting the cost and choosing to fight anyway." For a long moment, the chamber was silent save for the crackle of fire. Torin grunted. "The girl speaks wisely, but wisdom does not shield us from blades. We must anticipate Gavrik's strike." The conversation turned to strategies and watchposts, but Evelith noticed how Tharion's gaze lingered on her, as though her words had pierced deeper than any counsel could. That night, Evelith was pulled into dreams not her own. She did not choose them. The pack's tether dragged her unbidden into Tharion's unconscious mind. She found herself standing in a battlefield drenched in crimson light. The corpses of fallen Stormcloaks littered the ground.
The banners of his clan burned, curling into ash, and in the center stood Caelora Nyx. Her figure was veiled in shadows, her eyes burning like coals. "You cannot escape me, Stormcloak heir," she whispered, though her lips did not move. Her voice came from the earth itself. Tharion fell to his knees before her, blood running from his chest like water. Evelith rushed forward, her bare feet sinking into the blood-soaked mud. "Stop this," she cried. "This isn't his fate to bear alone." Caeliora's gaze shifted to Evelith, a smile curving like a blade. "Ah, the Dreamwalker, the chosen sacrifice." She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to brush Evelith's cheek. Though only a dream, Evelith felt the cold of 1,000 winters crawl beneath her skin. Evelith recoiled, but the world fractured like glass. She awoke with a scream in her chamber, sweat slicking her body, the raven crest on her wrist glowing faintly with an eerie pulse. Tharion was already at her side, his breath ragged, his hand gripping his chest. He had felt it too. "She knows me," Evelith whispered, her voice breaking. "She sees me now." Tharion had believed the Moonstone relic would mute the bond and protect Evelith. Instead, it had become a curse of its own. The more he wore it, the more it leached his strength. His skin grew pale, shadows hollowed his eyes. Evelith noticed how his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching, how his hands trembled when he tried to lift a sword. Yet he refused to discard it. "I will not let you bear the pain," he said one morning, as she tried to unfasten the chain from his neck. "And I will not watch you die for me," Evelith countered, her voice sharper than she intended. "This isn't protection, it's suicide." Their argument ended in silence, but something unspoken tightened between them. Evelith began searching the keep's archives, hoping some forgotten record of Caeliora's curse might hold a clue. Nights blurred into mornings as she pored over tomes, scrolls, and journals by candlelight, her eyes aching with exhaustion. And in those sleepless nights, she began to dreamwalk willingly. She tested the edges of her gift, pushing herself deeper into the dreamscape to glimpse fragments of Caeliora's past. She saw flashes, a woman kneeling by her brother's body, his blood pooling in the dirt, stormcloak blades glinting in the moonlight. Her face contorted with grief, so profound that it twisted into hatred. Evelith woke each time with tears on her cheeks, her chest heaving with a sorrow not her own. While Evelith battled visions, Gavrik of the Ironclaw clan made his move. His messengers arrived at Dreadmere Keep under the guise of peace, offering trade agreements and kinship bonds, but Torin recognized the trap immediately. "Gavrik does not seek alliance," Torin warned Tharion. "He seeks to measure your weakness. If he smells death upon you, he will march with fire and steel." And indeed, scouts reported Ironclaw warriors massing near the borders, their camps growing each night. Tharion's condition was no secret. Gavrik would not wait much longer. Amid the storm of threats, Evelith and Tharion found a rare quiet in the castle's western tower. The moon hung pale above the sea cliffs, its light bathing the stones in silver. "You should hate me," Tharion said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was raw, stripped of command. "The pact should have claimed some nameless servant, some willing martyr. Instead, it bound you. And now you suffer because of me." Evelith turned, her heart pounding. "I don't hate you. I never could." Their bond hummed faintly, the tether transmitting not just words, but the fragile truth beneath them. Tharion's anguish pressed against her heart, mingling with her own. "It isn't your fault," she whispered, her hand brushing against the raven crest. "It's hers, Caeliora's, and I've seen her pain. I think the oath is more than vengeance. It's grief, twisted until it became poison." Tharion studied her, as though seeing her anew. In that moment, the stoic warrior and the hidden scribe were no longer bound by duty, but by something gentler, something that terrified them both. The moment broke when a horn sounded in the distance. Scouts had returned, and with them, dire news. Matron Lysa summoned Evelith and Tharion. Her voice was grave, her eyes clouded with visions. She intoned, "The Shroud Vale Grove calls. Caeliora's spirit festers there, tangled in root and mist. If you wish to break the oath, you must confront her where her rage was bound." Evelith's heart stuttered. The grove. She had seen it in dreams. Twisted trees, mist curling like fingers, whispers that crawled into the soul. Torin protested, but Tharion silenced him with a raised hand. "We go. If we do nothing, I die anyway. If we face her, perhaps we find freedom." And so, with Gavrick's forces gathering, with the oath gnawing at their bond, Evelith and Tharion prepared to leave Dreadmere Keep and walk willingly into the heart of Caeliora's vengeance. But as Evelith lay awake that night, she could not shake the feeling that the grove would not just test their strength, it would test the very essence of who they were, and whether their trust could endure the shadows waiting to devour them.
The nights grew longer after their return from the archives. The moon seemed reluctant to abandon the skies, and each dawn dragged its light across the world like a wounded beast struggling to rise. Within Dreadmere Keep, silence had become a second heartbeat, pulsing behind every conversation, every movement, every glance between Evelith Caelora and Tharion Draegor. The truth of Celoria Nyx's vengeance and the Blood Oath's twisted mechanics had carved itself into their souls. Knowledge was a weapon, but it was also a burden, and now both scribe and warrior carried its weight with equal measure. Evelith moved through the corridors with her eyes lowered but her senses sharpened. The binding pact had grown stronger since their last venture, tugging at her essence with invisible threads. At times she could feel Tharion's exhaustion ripple across her chest like phantom pains. His hands, steady in the eyes of his clan, trembled in hers when the walls held no witnesses. There was no mask between them anymore. The bond had made them unwilling confessor and reluctant guardian both. And yet, beneath the suffocating dread, something else stirred. An unspoken understanding, a tether of trust slowly taking root where the curse meant only to sow destruction. One evening, as the storm clouds gathered above the cliffs, Tharion summoned his war council. Evelith was there, not by his invitation, but because the binding pact allowed her no distance from him without consequence. Torin, ever watchful, noticed her presence with a scowl, but said nothing. Gavrick of the Ironclaw clan had sent word again, provocations dressed as formal declarations. His emissaries had delivered demands laced with insults, insisting Tharion step down before his weakened blood endangered the region further. The council chamber thrummed with anger, voices raised, fists pounding the table. Evelith sat in the corner, watching Tharion's patience unravel thread by thread. For the first time she glimpsed the weight of his crown, not in his armor or his sword, but in the way his silence had to cut through a chorus of loyalty and fury alike. At last his voice cleaved the air. "If Gavrick believes Dreadmere Keep will bow because he smells weakness, he is a fool. Let him sharpen his claws on shadows. We will not break." The words brought cheers, but Evelith's heart sank. The oath's hunger pulsed beneath her ribs, reacting to Tharion's defiance as though the curse itself wanted to provoke ruin. That night she slipped into dreamwalking without intention, pulled by the tether into his restless mind. She saw him standing in a battlefield of ash, bodies littered around him, his armor shattered. Gavrick's laughter echoed from beyond the smoke, but worse than that was the look on Tharion's face. Hollow-eyed, broken, utterly alone. She tried to reach him, to remind him she was there, but the dream dissolved into shadow before she could make a sound. When she awoke, Tharion was already by her side, eyes weary but voice firm. "You saw, didn't you?" he asked, his tone lacking surprise. Evelith noted. The pact had erased any pretense of privacy. She admitted what she had seen, her voice trembling, and Tharion sat in silence for a long while. Then he said something that startled her. "Better me than you." She wanted to argue, but his expression silenced her. Steel forged by years of burden, a resignation that had been with him long before she arrived. In the days that followed, tension coiled tighter. Gavrick's raiding parties prowled the borders, and whispers of betrayal from lesser clans reached the keep. Evelith continued her dreamwalking, hoping to find something, anything, that could serve as leverage. Instead, she found herself slipping deeper into Celoria Nyx's shadow. Each dream bled fragments of the sorceress's grief and fury into Evelith's mind, her brother's lifeless body, the stormcloak blade glinting red, the vow sworn on blood-soaked earth. The memories felt too vivid, too real, as though Caelora herself was planting them into her mind. She began to fear that the sorceress's essence was no longer confined to the grove, but was bleeding into her very soul through the oath's channels. One night she sought out matron Lysa, desperate for clarity. The old mystic sat by the fire, her wrinkled hands tracing patterns in the air, as though weaving invisible threads. Evelith confessed what she had seen, what she had felt, the pain of a woman centuries dead echoing in her heart. Lysa listened without interruption, her gaze sharp despite her age. At last she murmured, "The oath feeds not only on vengeance, child, but on empathy. Caelora seeks to make you her vessel, to continue her rage through your heart. Forgiveness may weaken her, but only if it is true. If you carry her pain as your own, she will consume you." Evelith left the chamber shaken. Forgiveness? Could she forgive a woman who sought her death, who would drain her to ash just to punish a lineage? But the thought gnawed at her. Perhaps Caelora's vengeance had become so twisted because no one had ever tried. Meanwhile, Tharion faced his own battles. He met with his warriors daily, sparred until his muscles ached, trained until sweat stung his eyes. He hid his decline as best he could, but Evelith saw it every time he staggered in private, every time the pact pulled too hard on his chest. His pride would not allow him to reveal weakness before the clan, but within their bond there was no veil. She felt his weariness as if it were her own. It terrified her to know that if he fell, she would too. And yet, it also strengthened the quiet bond forming between them, a trust forged not of choice, but of necessity, tempered into something unexpected. The moonstone relic, once meant to shield him, had grown treacherous. Evelith watched it glow faintly on his chest, each shimmer draining more of his life. She begged him to discard it, but he refused. If it mutes the bond even for a moment, it spares you. She wanted to scream at him for his stubbornness, for his willingness to sacrifice, but the words died on her lips. Deep down, she knew she would have done the same. As the days bled into nights, Gavrik made his move. Scouts brought word of Ironclaw forces massing near the northern ridge, their banners visible from the cliffs. Tharion called for readiness, but Evelith saw his exhaustion falter at last. That night, when sleep finally claimed them both, Evelith entered the dreamscape, not of her own will, but dragged by the force of the pact. She found herself in Shroudvale Grove, though it was darker than ever, its trees twisted into monstrous forms. Caelora stood before her, cloaked in shadow, her eyes twin embers of fury. You cling to him. You think trust will save you, but his bloodline must pay, as they always must. When he falls, you will fall. That is the fate I gave you. Evelith's knees shook, but she forced herself to meet the gaze. Your vengeance ended long ago. I've seen your pain, your loss, but I won't let it own me. The sorceress laughed, a sound like shattering glass, and lunged. Evelith awoke screaming, the raven crest on her wrist burning like fire. Tharion was beside her instantly, clutching her hand, though his face was pale as parchment. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. The confrontation with Gavrik came sooner than expected. Scouts brought word of a midnighted dance, Ironclaw soldiers marching under cover of mist. Dreadmere Keep erupted in preparation, armor strapped, horns sounded, torches lit along the walls. Evelith stood beside Tharion as he donned his battle-worn breastplate, every movement measured though his hands trembled. The pack's tether was taut as wire. She could feel his determination sear through her veins. "Stay behind," he ordered, his tone rough. She shook her head. "You can't command the pact, Tharion. Where you go, I go." The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Ironclaw warriors clashed against the defenders of Dreadmere, steel singing against steel, the air thick with cries and blood. Tharion led the charge, his blade a flash of silver fury. Evelith stayed close, the raven crest glowing faintly as though feeding on the struggle. Through the bond, she felt his every strike, his every wound, and for the first time she fought, not with sword or shield, but with her gift. She dreamwalked into the minds of enemies mid-combat, sowing confusion, showing them visions of failure and fear until they faltered. Some turned their blades on one another, others fled screaming. Her presence was unseen, but its effects rippled across the battlefield like wildfire. Yet Gavrik himself appeared at the height of the chaos, towering and brutal, his warhammer shattering shields with each swing. He sought Tharion directly, roaring challenges across the bloodied ground. Their clash shook the earth, each blow echoing the weight of years of rivalry. Evelith felt the toll instantly, her own breath seizing as the pack transmitted the force of each strike. She staggered but pressed forward, refusing to let Tharion fall alone. Gavrik taunted him, mocked his lineage, cursed his weakness. And still Tharion stood, not for pride, but for the lives depending on him. In a desperate moment, Evelith cast herself into Gavrik's mind. The effort nearly broke her, but she forced him to see visions, not of Tharion's defeat, but of his own. Ironclaw banners burning, his warriors slain, his blood spilled across the ridge. The shock faltered his strike for the briefest heartbeat, but it was enough. Tharion drove his blade into Gavrik's chest, the warlord's roar cut short as he collapsed into the mud. The Ironclaw forces faltered without their leader, scattering into the mist. The defenders of Dreadmere roared in triumph, but Evelith could barely stand. The pack's tether burned hotter than ever. The strain of her dreamwalking mingled with Tharion's wounds. She clutched his arm as they staggered back toward the keep, their bond heavier than chains, yet strangely lighter than before. For the first time, the oath's weight seemed to shift, not only toward despair, but to something resembling hope.
The night after the clash in Shroudvale Grove was one neither Evelith nor Tharion would forget. The grove itself, once thick with menace, felt changed. Its whispers no longer carried only threats, but something softer, as if even the forest recognized their fragile shift from vengeance to reconciliation. Yet unease lingered. Though Evelith's forgiveness of Solorian Nyx loosened the curse's grip, the blood oath had not fully released them. Its poisons still gnawed at Tharion's strength like a slow shadow. Their return to Dreadmere Keep was heavy with silence. Torin greeted them at the gate, his keen eyes catching the exhaustion etched into their faces. He spoke no words of judgment, yet his silence cut sharp as a reminder of duty and expectation. Whispers of the grove had already spread, swelling into rumor. Some said Evelith bound Soloria's spirit, others that Tharion had fallen and risen by forbidden magic. In Ironhaven, rumors carried more weight than steel, and Evelith's presence fanned the flames. Within the keep's cold halls, Evelith could not rest. She wandered beneath tapestries of ancient wars and betrayals, their woven warriors seeming to watch her with silent accusation. She pressed her palm to the raven crest on her wrist, the mark pulsing faintly like another heartbeat, promise and chain in one. Tharion buried himself in the war chamber. Maps sprawled before him, detailing not only Draegor lands, but also Gavrik Ironclaw's growing reach. The rival chieftain would sense weakness. The Draegors could not afford division. Yet every calculation faltered beneath the weight inside his chest, the bond to Evelith pulling him between ruin and salvation. Their words to each other were hesitant, as if honesty itself might shatter them. Evelith longed for share the dream fragments she glimpsed, Soloria before the oath, broken by grief, not rage. But when she saw Tharion's shoulders bent under leadership's burden, she held her silence. The days blurred. Evelith worked beside matron Lysa, translating brittle scrolls etched with warnings of Soloria's wrath. Her dreamwalking let her glimpse the scribe's fear, their trembling hands and whispered dread as they recorded oaths binding blood to soul. Each vision left Evelith shaken, yet more determined to find release. Tharion, with Torin's aid, drilled the warriors. The clang of steel filled the courtyards, though his strength waned beneath the oath's toll. At night he sat alone with the moonstone relic, its glow dulling his bond with Evelith as it drained his body hollow. Evelith found him once in the chamber, gripping the relic like it was all that held him together. She whispered, "You cannot bear this alone. The relic kills you faster than the oath." He raised weary eyes. "Would you have me cast it aside and drown in your fear, your dreams? If I falter, the clan falls. Gavrik waits for weakness." She bared her wrist, the crest glowing. "Then let me share it. The bond was meant to be born together. If forgiveness could touch Soloria, perhaps trust can shield us." He could not answer, not with command or denial. The bond's thrum between them was louder than words. But respite was short. Scouts soon returned. Gavrik Ironclaw gathered forces near the borderlands, mercenaries drawn by promises of plunder. He would not wait for Tharion's decline. He meant to strike. The council met in haste. Torin urged fortifications, while Lysa spoke of omens, wolves devouring each other under a red moon.
Evelith, though not given voice, stepped forward. If Gavrik comes, arms will not save us. The oath festers in Shroudvale Grove. That is the wound we must heal, or all else will fall. Murmurs rose, sharp with doubt, but Tharion silenced them. She is right. My strength fades. If we face Gavrik and the oath both, then we must first strike at its source. Reluctant, unsettled, the council agreed. Preparations began at once. Warriors armed themselves, supplies gathered. Evelith trained alongside them, her grip on steel uncertain, but her resolve firm. Her strength lay in visions, and each night she searched the dreamscapes for Caeloria's sorrow, piecing together the grief that had birthed the oath. When the company marched for Shroudvale again, mist swallowed them at the forest's edge. Evelith felt the bond tighten, tugging her towards something vast and waiting. Tharion strode beside her, hand never far from his blade, though his gaze lingered on her crest, glowing brighter with each step. This time, the grove was alive. Apparitions drifted among the roots, ghosts of those claimed by the blood oath, their voices fractured into curses and laments. Warriors faltered at the sight, but Tharion's presence steadied them, even as Evelith felt the drain it took. Deeper they pressed until they reached the grove's heart, where mist thickened into a wall. Evelith's wrist burned, visions striking her down. She saw Caeloria kneeling by her brother's body, grief tearing the air, her magic storming from sorrow as much as rage. Tharion caught Evelith as she staggered. "What did you see?" I breathed her grief. It was sorrow, not only vengeance. If we meet her wrath with wrath, we lose. We must show her forgiveness, that the cycle can end. The mist stirred, listening. Tharion stared at her torn between doubt and belief, then unclasped the moonstone relic. "Then we end it together. No relics, no walls between us." He cast it into the fog, and the bond between them surged, unbound, raw, and overwhelming. They felt everything. Pain, fear, determination, as one. From the mist, Caeloria emerged. Her form was shadow and fire, voice both wail and accusation. "You would unmake what I forged in agony? You would strip me of the justice carved with blood?" Evelith stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "Not strip, release. Your justice bound you as it bound them. Let it go." The grove convulsed, the dead shrieked, roots twisted. Tharion raised his blade, but Evelith laid her hand upon his arm. They faced Caeloria's wrath together, the bond their shield. The battle for the oath had begun.
The hours after the bloody clash blurred into one another. Smoke drifted from shattered braziers, the heavy tang of blood and iron hanging in the ruined courtyard of Dreadbeard Keep. Tharion Draegor stood amidst the wreckage, exhaustion grinding into his bones like a dull blade. Around him, his warriors tended the wounded, gathered the fallen, and shored up the breaches Gavrik's ambush had left in the walls. The air itself seemed to throb with sorrow, and with it, a silent question. How much more could they endure? Evelith Caelora's presence cut through that heaviness. Though pale from strain, she moved among the injured with quiet determination, her hand brushing foreheads, whispering reassurances. Some she eased with poultices or gentle words, others she guided into a deeper rest with her dream-walking, steering their sleep away from nightmares. She was becoming more than an outsider to the clan. They looked at her differently now, not merely as a scribe, not only as the woman bound to their chiefdom, but as a figure of unexpected strength who bore the same weight they carried. Yet beneath the surface, tension brewed. The binding pact still tethered Evelith's life to Tharion's, her vitality bleeding out in threads he could almost feel, tugging from her soul into his own. He felt stronger in bursts, but each surge came at her expense. Watching her shoulders slump after a round of tending the wounded cut deeper than any blade. He wanted to rip the tether apart with his bare hands, but every attempt to withdraw or shield her had only made things worse. And then there was Caelorion Nyx. Her presence, unseen yet felt, had thickened in the wake of the battle. At night, the shadows stretched long in torchlight, whispering with voices that seemed to belong to the long dead. In Evelith's dreams, Caeloria's laughter echoed like a knife across glass, daring her to keep resisting. In Tharion's waking hours, he sometimes caught her silhouette drifting across the edge of vision, always in the direction of the Shroudvale Grove. The grove itself had become an unspoken center of dread. Everyone knew the final confrontation would lead there, where the oath's power knotted thick
thickest. The forest loomed outside the keep's walls like a living reminder of their dwindling time. It was Torin who voiced what they all knew. Standing over the map table, littered with bloodstains, he pressed his palms flat. "We can hold the walls against Ironclaw for another season if we must, but the oath." His gaze slid to Tharion, hard but steady. "It's not something steel or stone can turn aside. The Grove is calling you. Her. Both of you." Evelith lifted her head, fatigue shadowing her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Celeria waits there. She's feeding the oath with her rage. If we don't confront her soon, it won't matter what relics we chase or how many walls we build. The pact will drain us both until there's nothing left." The words sent a ripple of unease across the room. Matron Lisa, frail but sharp-eyed, nodded from her seat by the hearth. "The Grove is the womb of her vengeance. To end this, you must enter the heart of it. Not with sword alone, but with the will to see what bound her spirit there." Her words lingered, unsettling in their implication. Tharion didn't like the sound of "not with sword alone." Battle he understood. Forgiveness, especially of the woman who had cursed generations of his bloodline, was another matter. He clenched his jaw, saying nothing, but Evelith caught the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. That night, as the fires died low and silence wrapped the keep, Evelith dream-walked without meaning to. One moment she was curled beneath her blankets, the raven crest on her wrist faintly glowing. The next she was standing in the Shroudvale Grove. Mists coiled between twisted roots, and Celeria Nyx awaited her. The sorceress's form shimmered between beauty and horror, her hair a cascade of black flame, her eyes wells of grief and fury. "She comes so willingly," Celeria whispered, her voice both mocking and sorrowful. "Do you seek to pity me, to offer forgiveness as if that could erase centuries of blood?" Evelith trembled, but she didn't look away. "I seek understanding. You were betrayed. I've seen glimpses of it. Your brother's death, the Stormcloak blade in his chest, but vengeance has chained you to pain. It's destroying more than you ever imagined." Celeria's laughter was bitter and sharp. "Pain is all that remains to me, and soon it will be all that remains to you. Do you think Tharion can bear your loss when the pack devours you? His clan will crumble, and I will watch it burn." Before Evelith could reply, shadows surged, wrapping around her throat like cold fingers. She gasped, clawing at them, until suddenly warmth flared at her wrist, the raven crest burning with defiance. The shadows dissolved, and Celeria's form retreated into the mist, her voice echoing, "Come to the Grove. There we will finish what began long ago." Evelith awoke with a cry, her body slick with sweat. Tharion was beside her instantly, gripping her shoulders, his face carved with fear. She told him everything, voice shaking, and when she finished, silence hung heavy between them. Finally, Tharion spoke. "Then it's decided. We go to the Grove." The days that followed were preparation in the form of quiet dread. The clan shored up defenses against Gavrick's remnants. Though scouts reported Ironclaw had scattered for now. Supplies were gathered, weapons sharpened, yet everyone knew steel alone would not win this. Tharion and Evelith walked the keep together more often, their silence heavy with unspoken fears. Each step brought them closer not only to Celeria, but to the truth of their bond. On the eve of departure, Tharion sought Evelith in the library where she had first worked as a quiet scribe. Dust hung in golden beams of lamplight, scrolls stacked high like the weight of generations. He found her tracing her fingers over a tapestry depicting the Stormcloak lineage, the raven crest now gleaming faintly on her wrist. "When I first came here," she said softly, not turning, "I wanted to disappear, to be a name no one remembered. Now I stand at the center of all this, and I don't know if I'm strong enough." Tharion stepped closer, his voice low. "Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's carrying it with you and still choosing to stand." He hesitated, then added, "I don't want your life burned out by this oath. If there were a way to sever it and leave me to the curse, I would take it." She turned then, her eyes shining with something fierce. "And I would not let you. Don't you see, Tharion? That's what Celeria expects, that we sacrifice, that we trade one life for another and keep her cycle of pain alive. If we choose differently, if we face her together, we can end it." For the first time in weeks, Tharion felt something like hope stirring in his chest. He reached out, and Evelith took his hand. The pact's tether pulsed between them, not as a chain but as something alive, something that felt almost like trust. When dawn broke, they departed. A small escort followed. Torin, grim and unyielding, Matron Lisa despite her frailty, and a handful of loyal warriors. Yet it was clear to all that the true battle lay not in numbers, but in what Evelith and Tharion carried within them. The Shroudvale Grove awaited, its mists curling on the horizon like fingers beckoning them closer. As they crossed into its threshold, silence fell. The air grew thick, every breath laden with the taste of sorrow. The trees leaned inward as though whispering secrets too heavy for mortal ears. Each step forward pressed against them like a weight, but neither faltered. The binding pact pulsed brighter with every stride, the raven crest glowing on Evelith's wrist, the moonstone relic flickering faintly at Tharion's throat. At the grove's heart, the shadows deepened. Celeria's form coalesced from the mist, her eyes fixed on them with burning hunger. So, the wolf and the dreamer come at last. Will you break, as all before you have, or will you bleed and join me in eternity? Her laughter rang out, and the mist thickened, wrapping the grove in a shroud of darkness. The final reckoning was about to begin.
The Shroudvale Grove was alive that night, but not with the kind of life that breathed joy. Its silence pressed inward, heavy and damp, broken only by the constant shifting of mist through the twisted trees. Evelith Caelora drew her cloak tighter, her breath ghosting into the chilled air. At her side, Tharion Draegor strode like a shadow, shoulders square despite the weariness gnawing at him. Their bond, the tether that had once drained her, now pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat that wasn't wholly hers. It steadied her, but it also reminded her of what they had come here to do: face Celoria Nyx. For days after Gavrick's bloody ambush, whispers from the Binding Pact had tugged Evelith deeper into fragmented visions. She saw Celoria standing in a storm of blood, chanting curses, eyes hollow with grief. The oath pulsed with renewed fury, its roots tangled within the grove itself. The closer they came, the heavier Evelith felt her chest, as if Celoria's sorrow had entwined with her own lungs. "Once we cross the heart of the grove," Tharion said, his low voice a growl meant for her ears alone. "There's no turning back. You're certain?" Evelith's hands tightened around the raven-etched dagger at her belt. "If I don't confront her, the oath endures. It won't stop with you. It will hunt the next leader and the next. Someone has to end it. Someone who can reach her." Tharion's gaze lingered, sharp, yet vulnerable. For all his stoicism, she could feel his fear, not of Celoria, but of losing Evelith to the grove's grip. He gave a single nod and drew his blade, its steel catching the pale glow of the moon that strained to break through the shifting mist. They pressed deeper into the forest. Roots bulged like veins underfoot, pulsing faintly with crimson light. The air thickened, carrying faint voices, whispers of warriors long dead, echoes of the oath's victims. Evelith stumbled once when a whisper laced with her own name slithered into her mind. She steadied, teeth gritted. At last, the grove opened into a clearing where the mist coiled into towering columns. In the center, a spectral figure waited. Celoria Nyx's form was draped in tatters of shadow and silver fire, her eyes hollow pools of mourning. The sorceress radiated not just power, but agony so raw it clawed at the edges of Evelith's soul. "So," Celoria's voice cut through the air like ice cracking, "the tethered ones come willingly. Tell me, Evelith Caelora, do you intend to beg for mercy or to sacrifice yourself and save this storm-cloaked dog like all the others before you?" Evelith stepped forward, despite Tharion's arm half lifting to bar her. "I came to end your vengeance, Celoria, not by feeding it, by understanding it." The sorceress laughed, a sound brittle, broken. "Understanding? Tell me then, Dreamwalker, do you understand what it is to hold your brother as he bleeds from a stormcloak blade? Do you understand waking to silence where once there was laughter? My oath is justice, carved eternal.
Images surged against Evelith's mind, sharp as knives. Caelora kneeling beside her brother's corpse, the moon overhead a pale witness to her scream. Evelith's knees nearly buckled. Tharion moved to steady her, but she pushed on, clinging to her gift. "I've seen your grief," Evelith whispered, voice trembling yet firm. "I've walked through it in your memories. But your oath doesn't bring him back. It only spreads the same grief to others. I know the pain of losing family too. It makes you want to unravel the world just to ease the weight in your chest. But vengeance is a chain. You forged it, and now you're bound by it." Caelora's face flickered, anguish breaking through the wrath. The spectral form wavered, then solidified again with a surge of flame. "Lies! You cannot know my torment! And you would deny me justice? You who hide behind Stormcloak blood? You'd betray your own soul for his survival?" Tharion finally stepped forward, blade lowered, his voice rough. "If vengeance gave you peace, you would have it by now, but all it's given you is centuries of chains. My family's blood cannot heal yours, but Evelith—" He looked to her, as if the word itself meant anchor. "She can, because she's not bound by Stormcloak or oath. She chose to stand here." The tension rippled. Caelora's power flared, mist coalescing into sheeps of wolves and warriors circling the clearing. Evelith's pulse quickened as the phantoms prowled closer, their eyes glowing crimson. One lunged, and Tharion's blade met it, sparks flying from shadow and steel. But Evelith knew the fight wasn't with them. She closed her eyes and let the tether pull her deeper, into Caelora's dreamscape. The grove vanished. She stood in a shattered hall lined with blackened tapestries. Caelora knelt in the center, clutching her brother's bloodied cloak. Her face was streaked with tears that would not dry. Evelith approached slowly. "I know you're trapped here. You've been reliving this moment over and over, haven't you?" Caelora's head lifted, her voice breaking. "If I let it go, I let him go. And if I let him go, then all I have left is emptiness." Evelith's throat tightened. She thought of her own sister, lost to fever when she was barely grown, and the nights she had begged dreams to return her to her. "You're wrong," she said gently. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying them with you without letting grief hollow you out. I've forgiven fate when it took my sister, though I thought I never could. But if I hadn't, I wouldn't still be here. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, Caelora. It gives it shape." Caelora's form flickered. The broken hall shifted, cracks of light spilling through. The oath writhed against Evelith, a serpent hissing fury. She must not forgive. The curse must feed. Evelith reached out, placing her hand over Caelora's. Warmth spread through the dreamscape, the first honest warmth it had felt in centuries. "You don't have to hold this anymore. He wouldn't want you bound to hatred. He'd want you free." Caelora trembled, her spectral body breaking apart into fragments of starlight. For the first time, her eyes softened, the rage falling away to leave only grief. She whispered, almost like a child, "Free?" "Yes," Evelith said, her voice firm, resolute. "Free." The hall shattered into light. Evelith gasped as she snapped back into her body in the clearing. Caelora stood before her, no longer twisted in shadow, but a translucent figure clothed in peace. She looked at Evelith, then Tharion, then upward toward the moonlit canopy. With a faint, grateful smile, she dissolved into silver mist. The phantoms around them collapsed, fading into silence. The red veins that had pulsed through the grove dimmed, then vanished entirely. Evelith staggered, her chest heaving, but the raven crest on her wrist shifted, its wings spreading wide, black ink turning into radiant silver. The binding pack's oppressive weight lifted. Tharion caught her as she swayed, pulling her against him with a grip that was both fierce and trembling. "You did it," he murmured. His voice cracked with something Evelith had never heard from him before. Awe. But the grove wasn't finished with them. A sudden clash of steel rang out beyond the mist. From the tree line emerged Chieftain Gavrik and his warriors, eyes glinting with hunger at the sight of Tharion weakened, his clan unprotected. "So the oath is gone," Gavrik sneered, raising his axe. "Good. Now the Stormcloaks have nothing left to shield them." Tharion's grip on his sword tightened, fury sparking. Evelith straightened beside him, her strength faint but steady. They exchanged one look, and in it was an unspoken vow, not of duty, not of magic, but of trust freely given. The battle was not yet over, but this time they would fight not as pawns of a curse, but as partners.
The battle for Dreadmere Keep bled into dawn. The once silent marshes trembled under the weight of clashing packs, the cries of the wounded, and the relentless drumming of war against the stone heart of the keep. The air was thick with smoke and salt, for even the sea beyond the cliffs seemed to rage with the storm, its waves hammering the rocks like a war drum. Above it all, the blood moon lingered, refusing to fade, a baleful omen of what was still to come. Evelith Caelora moved through the chaos like a phantom. Her wolf had been set free hours ago, and the battlefield bore its scars: shattered shields, torn banners, warriors who had underestimated the quiet half-blood girl. Now her eyes glowed with lunar fire, her breaths coming ragged but steady. Each strike was precise, fueled by both fury and purpose. But inside her chest, her heart warred harder than her claws ever could. Somewhere above the chaos, in the highest tower of Dreadmere Keep, Tharion Draegor and his father Werewolf were locked in battle. She could feel it, as if every clash of steel between them reverberated through her bones. She wanted to be there, to stand beside Tharion in his final rebellion, but the tide of enemies kept pulling her back. Caelora Nyx had not left her side since the battle began. The seer silver hair was matted with ash, her voice hoarse from summoning the moon's blessings upon the Draegor rebels. Though her body was frail, her presence was iron. She moved behind Evelith like a shadow, weaving enchantments into her strikes, warning her when blades approached unseen. "Go to him," Caelora brasped between incantations. "The blood that stains this keep is endless, but your bond with him, your blood oath, matters more than any battle won or lost." Evelith's chest tightened. She turned to her friend, torn between duty to the warriors dying around her and the ache in her heart that told her Tharion needed her. "If I leave you—" She won't, Caelora said firmly, eyes flashing with rare anger. "I am no child to coddle. Go, Evelith. If you falter, all of this is meaningless." For a moment, Evelith lingered, blood-slicked hands tightening on the hilt of her blade. Then she shifted, her wolf surging forward in a blur of silver and shadow. She tore through the battlefield, ignoring wounds, ignoring cries, ignoring everything but the tower looming above like a jagged fang against the storm-racked sky. The climb through Dreadmere was a blur of steel, arrows, and snarls. She moved like a creature possessed, each heartbeat echoing Tharion's name. The tower doors loomed, iron-bound and scarred from the fight already raging within. She shoved them open, and the sight inside stole her breath. The chamber was a storm of steel and fury. Tharion Draegor, his chest heaving, his blade crimson, faced his father, the monstrous Alpha Werewolf. The older Draegor was a giant even among wolves, his frame draped in heavy black armor, his eyes burning with a cruelty Evelith had never seen before. The two had already wounded each other, blood painting the stone floor, but neither faltered. Tharion staggered, but did not fall. His blade rose again, defiance written in every line of his battered body. "You will not chain me to your legacy," he spat, blood mixing with his words. Werewolf sneered, his voice echoing like thunder. "You were born in my shadow. You will die in it. No half-blood witch will change that." Evelith's wolf snarled, the sound ripping through the chamber. Both men turned, and for a heartbeat, time froze. Tharion's eyes widened with relief and fear at once, while Werewolf's gaze hardened with venom. "You," Werewolf growled, recognition dripping with disdain, "the stain upon our bloodline." Evelith stepped forward, her body trembling with exhaustion but her resolve blazing. "I am no stain. I am the bond your son chose, and together we will end you." The battle that followed shook the tower. Tharion and Evelith fought as one, his blade, her claws, his strength, her speed, weaving together in a dance of defiance against the beast who had ruled their lives. Werewolf was relentless, a wall of steel and rage, but every strike he dealt was met with their unity. Yet even unity bled. Evelith's side was torn open by a brutal slash, her vision dimming. Tharion was driven to his knees, blood streaming from a wound at his shoulder. Werewolf loomed over them, his blade raised high for the killing blow. And then Caeliora's voice cut through the storm. From the shattered doorway the seer stood, bloodied but unbroken, her hands glowing with silver fire. "By the oath of the moon," she cried, her voice ringing like a bell, "no tyrant shall outlive the bond of true mates." Her spell struck Werewolf like a lance of light. For the first time the Alpha staggered, his blade faltering. Evelith seized the moment, her wolf rising with a roar that echoed through stone and sky. She leapt, claws sinking into Werewolf's chest, ripping through armor and bone. At the same time, Tharion's blade found its mark, piercing his father's heart. The great Alpha's roar filled the chamber, a sound of fury, denial, and finality. Then, silence. Evelith Draegor collapsed, his shadow finally broken. For a long moment, the three of them stood over the body. The storm outside began to ease, the blood moon dimming into pale dawn. Evelith swayed, her wound screaming, her strength spent. Tharion caught her before she could fall, his forehead pressing to hers. "It's over," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's finally over." But Evelith knew it wasn't. Outside, the battlefield still raged. The fall of Werewolf would break the enemy's spirit, but victory would not mend the scars carved into their clans nor erase the blood spilled across the marshes. Caelora Nyx leaned heavily against the doorway, her face pale but resolute. "The keep is yours, but the war is not won by killing one tyrant. It will be won by what you build after." Her words rang true, and Evelith's heart tightened. She and Tharion were no longer just rebels. They were the heirs to a broken legacy, and whether they liked it or not, the future of every clan now rested on their shoulders. As dawn spread over Dreadmere, casting light on the battlefield below, Evelith looked into Tharion's eyes. In them she saw exhaustion, grief, and love, a bond forged in fire and blood. Together they had survived. Together they would face what came next. For the first time in her life, Evelith Caelora did not feel like an outcast. She felt like the beginning of something new.